evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this session. I see some familiar names, but actually largely not. So I hope those of you who know something about the Insiders Outsiders project will forgive me if I say a few words by way of introduction. And actually, Marjorie, I can't remember how our paths first crossed, but you've certainly been a loyal follower, coming to me with all sorts of interesting information along the way.
I think
Basically,
it's purely through research work, most probably, Monica.
I don't
And
recall the
it's
exact.
some time back. I mean, you've given me
It
some
is exactly. It's a
marvelous
while ago,
bits and
isn't it?
pieces to do. Thank you very much.
Anyway, I'm a London-based art historian with a long-standing interest in creativity, in adversity, to put it sort of rather pretentiously, but art made in relation to war and displacement and trauma and Jewish identity, the Holocaust, World War II in particular. And I had a small idea actually way back now in 2017 that got quite rapidly, surprisingly big, gratifyingly big. And that was to instigate a project that would pay tribute and look in a more nuanced and indeed critical way at the extraordinarily rich and pervasive and diverse contribution made by refugees, most of them Jewish, of course, by force of circumstance, but not all, made by refugees from Nazi-occupied Europe to British culture. And it took the form in the first instance of a year-long nationwide arts festival across the country. It was rather wonderful how many people came on board. But then COVID struck, and thereafter we went online, and this session tonight is part of an ongoing series of mostly online events on a whole range of relevant projects. Again, sort of really quite amazing in the diversity. And if you're interested and don't know about the project, do take a look at the Insiders Outsiders Festival.org website. We have a YouTube channel which includes recordings of most of our online events across many different topics, and this one too is being recorded and will be added to that rich array in a week or so. But let me now cut to the chase, as they say, and introduce our speaker for today. I think many of you do already know her, Marjorie Downward. Marjorie, I think in fact also again you were supposed to give this talk or a version of the talk some while ago, and circumstances intervened and we had to postpone. So it's a particular pleasure to have you talking to us tonight. Let me just say a little bit about her. And she's asked me to say, and I would completely corroborate this, that she is a very modest person, but with a fantastically rich and deep knowledge of so many things. I'm sort of, every time I talk or I'm in contact with Marjorie, I'm deeply impressed. She's a retired musician and composer, but now works primarily as an independent researcher on a wide range of topics relating to different aspects of 19th, 20th, and indeed 21st century social history, particularly in relation to war and the legacy of war. She's been involved in editing stories of World War II refugees, about European voluntary workers and POWs who came to England and stayed and made England their home. She's also assisted various authors, I hope you've got due credit for it, Marjorie, with their researches, including on the pioneers and the World War II years of Gordonstoun School and the Jewish X-Troop, another very fascinating topic. She's in the midst of new research on a whole range of very interesting topics, but if I just mention briefly, she's been looking at the life and work of Lola Hahn-Warburg, who we'll hear more about, I'm sure, the role of the Quakers in relation to that, Lina Richter, again, a remarkable woman, and Susanna Lachmann, who was one of Germany's finest violinists, who ended up in Gordonstoun. So perhaps, hopefully, if time allows, Marjorie, you can tell us about your new researches. Okay, I think everybody knows the ropes. If you could make sure to stay muted while Marjorie's talking. We will have time for a Q&A and discussion afterwards. If you'd like to start typing any questions or comments you may have in the chat as Marjorie goes along, you're very welcome to do so. Yes, I think without further ado, as they say, let me hand over with great pleasure to Marjorie. I will absent myself, and Marjorie, you're going to tell me to start screen sharing in a minute or straight away?
Well, thank you very much indeed, Monica, for yet another good welcome, and welcome to you all for joining me tonight. Schools on the Move became a private research project which developed from me being involved in some research work for Mary Byatt's two books about the history of the pioneering and war years of Gordonstoun School from 1933 to 1945. Now, during this research, I discovered there was numerous residential learning places set up in this country by German, Austrian Jewish refugees to receive and care for young Jewish refugees and adults fleeing from the tyrannical threats of the Nazi regime. I'll say that word again, tyrannical. For example, There were other schools which included Stokely Rough in Surrey and the Czech School, which ended up in Wales. It originally was in Surrey, went to Shropshire, and then went into Wales. I chose to add Bunce Court and Camphill to my interest in Gordonstoun School's ethos due to their different approaches to educating the children that they brought to this country. A progressive approach run on the lines of the Montessori method was evident at Bunce Court under the leadership of Anna Essinger. The experiential approach attached to the ideas based on Plato's Republic under the leadership of Kurt Hahn. The curative approach aimed at doing where children are free from academic learning to give a focus on practical and social activities led by Karl and Tilly König. They were followers of Rudolf Steiner's principles of anthroposophy combined with normal medicine. They founded the Camphill movement over in Aberdeen. Despite each of these three schools' educational differences, they all had adopted more or less the same approach, really, looking at a holistic approach to nurture the whole person through compassion, honesty, integrity, consideration, kindness, a feeling of belonging, identity, and self-worth, and most importantly, possibly, to be considerate to other people through good health, fitness, and service. The three educators had encountered educational experiences of their own when they were young, through their own experiences in higher education as well, and not forgetting their workplaces. All had experiences of travel and living in other countries. They had vision. Slide number 2, please. Hello, Monica. Slide number 2. Slide number, lovely. Pre-1933, oh, right. Slide number 2, that's it, thank you. Pre-1933, during the 1920s, both Anna Essinger and Kurt Hahn had founded schools in southern Germany. Although somewhat different in their approach in the selection of children and ethos, both schools were highly successful. The decision to leave Salem and Hellingen in 1933 was due to the threat and clash with the ideals of the new Nazi regime when Hitler came to power. In Austria, Silesia, and Switzerland, Karl König was a successful practicing pediatrician, specializing in children's physical and mental disabilities. On his return to Vienna, the Nazi regime curtailed the width of his skills. The Nazi regime posed a very serious threat to the lives of the Jewish population in Europe. He, his wife and family, with friends and staff, fled Austria to Scotland in 1938. Slide 2, yes. Slide 3. Anna Essinger is possibly the most experienced of the three when it comes to teaching. She, with her two sisters, started a school in Hellingen, Landerziehungsheime, which is in South Germany, not far from Ulm. She became headmistress here with the two sisters running it at the school. Oh my goodness, where's me?
Are you okay?
Could you go to the next slide?
Next slide, sure.
Yes.
Hold on a second. There we go.
There we go. Now here is Hellingen Landerziehungsheim, or boarding school for children with special needs. This is their school. It's absolutely loaded with children, and it was very successful. Unfortunately, once the Nazi regime took over, on Hitler's birthday, the school had to hang out a flag, the Nazi flag. Anna Essinger was not happy about this at all, so she decided to take the children out for a walk that day. And once the children left the school, the caretaker hung up the flag. Unfortunately, something must have gone wrong, and somebody found out that she had done this, and she was certainly on the list to be got at by the Nazi Party. I will come to her story a bit more in a minute, because I have a little bit more to say about the education bit here. Her education was progressive, and it was introduced in the 19th century by John Dewey. The idea was the education had its roots as far back as Rousseau in a book called Emile, about 1762, which is a treatise on education in the form of a novel. Experimental come progressive schools became quite popular in the late 20th century. Cecil Reddy's school in Derbyshire in the 19th century, I do beg your pardon, the 19th century. Cecil Reddy's school in Derbyshire, Abbott's Home, was a great inspiration to Kurt Hahn. Whilst in the USA, Essinger was introduced to the progressive education method, which had similar values related to the Montessori system of learning founded by Maria Montessori. The idea is to allow flexibility in learning based by needs and capabilities of the individual child, with an aim to integrate theoretical learning with practical work and to encourage the development of social skills. To quote some words from the foreword of Mary Bart's book, Gordonstoun's Pioneers and Pioneering, 1933 to 1940, the Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, wrote, "It was due to the enthusiasm and determination that Gordonstoun School survived its early years and became a success. The sheer practical challenge of coping with a growing number of boys, converting largely unsuitable buildings, improvising, adapting, innovating, and just coping with Kurt Hahn's ambition and exuberant imagination must have been partly exhilarating, but also partly exhausting. The moves to both Gordonstoun and Wales greatly helped Kurt Hahn to put his ideas into practical form, and at the same time creating a new school from scratch. He turned a dream into a reality." These words can also be applied to Anna Essinger and Karl König's early encounters too. Through sheer will and a need to make something of their lives and for others in entirely new circumstances in a different country was a challenge all round, having to consider language. It was necessary to learn and speak English to communicate and fit in with the locality and wider areas, also looking ahead to the future of the youngsters. The domestic arrangements. The living conditions when they came to the places in this country were far from ideal. All hands on deck were needed to make the building suitable for purpose. Food, heating, light, ablutions had to be worked out. The staff and pupils learnt to be helpful in running a successful home. Adult responsibility. Caring for youngsters in their charge was paramount. Children being away and a long way from home, from their parents and other members of their families, need to be in a secure and stable environment. The staff and pupils at Bunce Court and Gordonstoun School worked hard to make the best of the buildings through a hands-on approach and making friends with good use of local resources around them. By making learning relevant and useful to children's needs, children become more focused and are eager to learn. Their aim was to nurture the creative, independent, and problem-solving abilities in all their charges, as opposed to the traditional learning, which tends to be of a more linear approach. Integrating theoretical or academic work with the experience of project-based experiential learning, in other words, learning by doing. The teacher's role was akin to that of a guide or a facilitator who stimulates learning to real life and everyday experiences. Examples of Anna Essinger's interpretation of progressive education includes the freedom to develop naturally in the absence of strict rules or harsh discipline and punishments, practical hands-on projects, experiential and expeditionary learning, problem solving, critical thinking, group work, and the development of social skills. In her school, there was an absence of, and I underline, a dominant faith. And this was substituted by a spiritual meaning akin to, but not totally, Quakerism. Silence played quite an important part in the children's education. They could choose later on which denomination they would like to be. So I'd now like to take you through from Herlingen School, the founding school with the Essinger sisters. And slide 5, the next one, is of the 3 sisters. Now, I suspect this photograph is taken at the Trench Hall in Shropshire when they evacuated, but nevertheless, this gives you an idea of what they look like, and the only one I could find at the moment. Slide 6, the Quakers gave an enormous amount of help to Jewish refugees. Bertha Bracey in particular, with all of her gang of Quakers, they organised transportation of children from Vienna and Berlin to have many children come to this country to be rescued. And you'll find in there, I've put a little bit more information about what's happening there to do with the Quakers. Right, carrying on to number 7. By the time the children arrive from Germany to Bunce Court in Kent, this is what they arrive to. Now, arriving to Bunce Court was quite an interesting venture because Anna Essinger decided when she was in Germany that she would like to take the whole school out of Germany because these children were children of Jewish parents. So she decided, in cahoots with the parents, to arrange 2 buses to take these children to the Hook of Holland, and each one would go in different directions. The children were told they were going to go on a very long holiday. I'm sure it took 6 months altogether to organise this extraordinary trip, and it certainly has its ups and downs, and you can find all the information to do with this particular venture in Deborah Cadbury's book. I've got here somewhere a copy of that book. I'll show you in a minute, but Deborah Cadbury has written a very good book about this particular venture. So in slide number 7, then we've got Bunce Court. The children arrive, coming for a very long holiday indeed. They arrive to somewhere that's pretty run down, hadn't got much going for it, but nevertheless, with her very skeleton staff, also from Germany, and these children, there must have been about, I keep getting different numbers, between 60 and 70 when I read about it, but we'll go for 65 in the middle. These children all learnt skills and learnt to make their own beds and also to help with gardening. They had chickens, they had pigs, and also they did a lot of practical hands-on work so that they could really be very busy and do something very purposeful. This all helps to keep children who have left home to come to a foreign country, helps them to keep busy and to take their mind off it. It's not to say that there was not trauma, but this was one of the ways, is to keep children really busy. Now, in the next slide, number 9, we've got music. Now, the arts flourished at Bunce Court with instrumental music and also in drama. And one of the drama teachers came from Germany. He also acted as the boiler man. So he was in charge of the boiler, but also he put on some marvellous plays, some Shakespeare plays. Shakespeare plays are very popular with the Germans. Hahn was very loved a Shakespeare play. So here's some children playing some music. And then if we move to number 10, please, Monica. Now, this is an interesting one. There was also a little cottage attached to Bunce Court, and all the little juniors were based in the cottage. And these two senior boys is Peter and Tommy Mayer. Now, most of the children who came over, and adults actually, to this country as refugees, found it better to change their name to a more English-sounding name. So these two boys changed their surname from Mayer to Morley. Now, some of us older ones might remember Peter Morley. He was a very fine documentary maker with what would be Channel 4 today. I suspect it would have been ITV many years ago. But this is the sort of thing that these boys could do, is to string up the telephone cables to the Bunce House cottage. Now, nowadays, of course, this would be seen as the most terrible thing to give a child to do. You'd have to sign all sorts of forms and what have you beforehand. And what is the risk assessment of such? Well, fortunately, they didn't get electrocuted, and they ended up in the British Army after they finished at Bunce Court. But they always kept a very, very close relationship with Anna Essinger and the sisters right up until their deaths. At the beginning of the war, Bunce Court area, Otterdon in Kent, became an area of military interest, both to the enemy and also our own military. So the school was asked to evacuate somewhere else. Number 11, please, Veronica. And through contacts of Anna Essinger's, the Goodyear brothers in Stockport owned Trench Hall, but it wasn't occupied. So the brothers gave her Trench Hall at Tilly Green, which is a small place near Wem in Shropshire. And it was here, when they got there, they had to start all over again, making things. And I suspect, actually, that slide 8 that you've seen already, and slide 9, with the boys making things in a workshop and the children playing music, I suspect those photographs might have been taken at Trench Hall. Slide 12. At Trench Hall, everyone had a lovely experience of learning to garden and to grow things. And also, one of the healthiest things for you is to have sunlight. And this is a lovely photograph of these children doing some gardening and keeping the place right, and also growing their own food, because we have to remember it's wartime, so it wasn't easy to access food like it would be normally out of wartime. Number 13, please. And another musical one. And Trench Hall was very lucky to have some very top musicians help out as staff, and also with the pastoral work. So they weren't short of culture. So once the war had ended, the school returned to Bunce Court in Kent. And of course, the house did have some changes to it. The house was left in a bit of a mess, but they soon got it back up to scratch. And after the war, Anna Essinger decided she didn't want anyone else to take over the work that she'd done. This is about 1948. There was an opportunity for someone to do that, but she wasn't happy with the way that he was going to change the school. Now, during the time that Bunce Court was in operation, many children from the kinder transport went to the school. There were as many as 100 children at some time. To this day, she is fondly remembered by many grateful children. And I think it's one of the short-lived projects, but actually a very endearing one. And here are past pupils and friends attending a blue plaque ceremony done by the Association of Jewish Refugees, and to reinstate the old school bell. Now, the old school bell found its way to California for some reason or another. However, it was found, cleaned up, and then brought back for this particular day and put back onto the roof of what was the school. It's now a private residence. So it's fantastic to see all the old pupils still going back. I think there are very few left now, I'm afraid. So Anna Essinger and her sisters and staff ran a very successful and happy, on the whole, a happy little school. And we have to remember always that it might sound ideal seeing these things, but actually underneath there is a great deal of trauma. And it is to the credit of the staff and also the children's peer groups that the children and the staff helped each other as much as they could through very difficult circumstances indeed. Let us move on to slide number 17. Kurt Hahn. Well, he certainly had quite an impression on my life. I spent 19 years as a full-time member of staff at this establishment between 1978 and 1997. It was an extraordinary experience, to say the least. Some very, very fine experiences, and I think experiences that I might not have had at other places. I don't know, but I went as a woodwind specialist, a full-time woodwind specialist, but I ended up also being assistant house mistress to 60 girls and doing drama productions, directing, producing, doing the makeup for somebody else's play, making costumes, finding costumes, and goodness knows what, and up and down mountains and around lakes or lochs. Goodness knows what else as well. It was a very interesting, enriching experience, to say the least. It put me in good stead to have the courage and confidence to do other things. And I've enjoyed, since I left there in 1997, enjoyed experimenting with other things and enjoying the idea of not being afraid to do something. So Kurt Hahn has quite an interesting history. He's educated in Germany and Oxford University. Now, this is a very important part of his life here because it comes into very good use later on in his life. And during this time, he was in Moray in Scotland. He was very friendly with Alistair Smith Cummings. Now, Alistair Smith Cummings' parents was Mansfield Smith Cumming and May Smith Cumming. Now, Mansfield Smith Cumming became the first head of MI6 in World War I. During World War I, Kurt Hahn worked in the German Foreign Office with Lena Richter, and that's a name that I'm working on at the moment and can come back to at a later time in another project. She was his secretary, and Kurt Hahn was also secretary to Prince Maximilian of Baden, who owned Salem or Schloss Salem in southern Germany near Lake Constantine. Due to the disappointments of change of governments and the problems associated with the outcome of the First World War, Kurt Hahn and Prince Maximilian von Baden decided that they would open up a school based at Schloss Salem in South Germany. Schloss Salem belonged to Prince Maximilian von Baden. Now, Monica, slide 80, thank you. This is Schloss Salem, a very grand place. I have been there, and it is beautiful. It really is beautiful. It still exists as a very successful boarding school. So after the time spent in politics, Prince Max and Kurt Hahn founded Salem School in 1920. Lena Richter also went to the school herself, and her son, Bex Richter, also was a pupil there, and found Kurt Hahn to be very much a father figure, having lost his own father when he was quite young. Bex Richter has an association with Gordonstoun throughout his life. So, Kurt Hahn made it known that he disliked school. It was clear that his early schooling in Berlin was based on the grind of linear learning. However, he did enjoy learning and reading, rarely. He was a good athlete, good at hockey, good tennis player, and Hahn was really a hands-on learner. He wanted to create a school designed to help youngsters discover their own interests, to find a grand passion, and to encourage character building. Experiential or experimental learning is the process of learning by doing or engaging students in hands-on experiences and reflection to enable them to better connect theories and knowledge learnt in the classroom. This idea ties in with Hahn's insistence on learning to understand and apply consideration, honesty, responsibility, to own your own actions, and to appreciate the value of social interaction. Thinking to work out what you like to do, acting to prepare the idea, experiencing to carry out the idea in reality, and reflecting to discuss what you have learned from that experience. Together with Hahn's idea of experiential learning, he incorporated 7 laws of Salem, which involved a totally structured way of life in both schools, both Gordonstoun and Salem. Time was well used with this and made no room for slacking. So I'm not going to go over the 7 rules due to time, but you can find those on the internet if you wish and have a good look at them. They're very good. I think it's called personal housekeeping. So if we move on to Kurt Hahn, 19, please, Monica. Now, Kurt Hahn, unfortunately, had an altercation with Hitler through the Potempa affair, where a young lad was beaten terribly and murdered by Nazi thugs. Kurt Hahn reacted to that. Kurt Hahn became a wanted man very quickly. This was 1933. He made a quick getaway through having the contacts. Now, Kurt Hahn was a most amazing, networker. So he'd already had contacts in this country due to his relations in this country prior to World War I. And also, 2 of the boys at Salem were English, 2 boys called Jocelyn Winthrop Young and Mark Arnold Forster. And these 2 boys his parents had enough influence to persuade Ramsay MacDonald to use his offices of power to have Kurt Hahn released from several days' worth of prison. Kurt Hahn made a quick escape to this country through knowing the Smith Cummingses. Mansfield Smith Cummings' wife, May Smith Cumming, had inherited some property called Gordonstoun School, the Round Square, and the estate. But prior to moving into Gordonstoun, the three boys moved to the Doon house at Rothiemurcus near Aviemore in Scotland, and then moved on to Gordonstoun, which is the second image at the bottom there. His staff was very thin. Lena Richter. Hahn was introduced to Prince Maximilian of Baden by Lena Richter. She was an Oppenheim, the daughter of Benoit Oppenheim, a very wealthy banker in Berlin. And they had all the contacts that anyone could possibly need to get what they wanted. Hahn also came from a very wealthy family in Berlin, and also they had many, many contacts too. So all in all, he was very lucky really to have these contacts to help him to get out of Germany. One of the things that's very difficult, that is, if you kick up against a system like what the Nazi system, and you go on the run, it also jeopardizes other people around you. And I think this was something that Lena Richter in particular was very worried about, that there would be repercussions on the likes of herself at the left exile. So she left Zalem and came to Gordonstoun and brought with her Bex, her son. So in 1934, the school moved to Gordonstoun. More staff joined the school, and many of them are refugees from Germany. And the school expands to 28 boys. In 1936, the school expands its staff, and the pupils' attendance reaches 88 boys. There are plans for a riding school. We'll come to the riding in a minute. And there was also a need for a place for the juniors. There were lots of juniors to be catered for. So an old house called Wester Elkies, way up in the back and beyond of nowhere near Craigellachie, was opened as the junior school and was run by Pat and Dolly Delan. Now, they took in quite a few refugee adults, and they helped to secure a nice environment for the children. But again, the house was not in a great state. I don't think there was any electricity. Everything was very primitive, but nevertheless, they all made ends meet and managed to keep it going for a while. The year ends with 126 boys in 1937. In 1938, Victor Soloshin, and a Jewish lawyer and cavalry officer of the First World War, was a very fine rider. His wife was a champion rider in Germany. Now, she wasn't totally Jewish. There was some Jewish in her background. She had two sons, George and Peter. Now, the boys changed their name to Saunders later, and this is another moment where having a German name isn't always handy if you're in this country. So they changed their name to Saunders. Moving on, please, to 20. On the Gordonstoun estate is the most beautiful little church called the Michael Kirk. It doesn't hold many people, but Kurt Hahn felt that Christianity should be the base for the school. Although he didn't turn Christian until much later on, he eventually did. But that was a place of worship. And also, leading up to the Michael Kirk is a very long walk through a wood from a lake. And that's called the Silent Walk. So as soon as you would enter that, you would be expected to be silent. And that tradition is still there to this day. It's quite nice. Here we have the famous nativity play. Every year the nativity play would always take place at Gordonstoun, and usually a Shakespeare play too. It is argued that by Kurt Hahn that Shakespeare was better in German than English, but I'm not going to argue that one now. Let's move on to the next slide. So culture was theirs, and of course outward bound type activities. Now, outward bound came on later on, but whilst they were in Gordonstoun, the nearby village, which is right by the sea, Gordonstoun is only about a mile up from the sea. One of the great things was to learn seamanship, which encourages great teamwork and also skills of really interesting rope work, knots, working as a team, going out on adventures and being quite courageous at times. I don't think it was for everybody, but most of the boys, old boys I've met, they quite enjoyed it, but not all of them. So this was quite a big feature, this. Now, this boat is called the May Cumming, which was named after May Smith Cumming. She died quite early on once Kurt Hahn had got the buildings to rent from her. But she was a very, very influential donor to Gordonstoun School. And I think this might be due to the fact that Kurt Hahn was very friendly with her son whilst he was at Oxford at the same time as Kurt Hahn. And unfortunately, Alistair Smith Cumming was a lieutenant in the Seaforth Highlanders and was in France near Meaux. And he was driving a car with his father as a passenger, and unfortunately the car crashed and killed the son. But the father survived. All sorts of tales surround this leg that disappeared, but it was in fact that he had have his leg amputated later on. And I think most probably that May Smith Cumming most probably saw Kurt Hahn as that substitute to a son and to give. Right, where are we? Here is Wester. Oh, could we go on to the next slide, please, Veronica, Monica? 22. Thank you. Well, here we have Wester Elkes School, which looks like a little castle. It looks quite grand, but actually it's quite run down inside. But they all managed at the end of the day. So I'm going to point out here that there's a person here, this boy on the left of the picture with his face turning towards the left, and that's Walter Heyman. Walter Heyman was a relative of Kurt Hahn, and as a young boy he was sent across from Cologne to Gordonstoun, and I think his parents followed on later on. But he did very well at Gordonstoun. He will admit in his book, My Life and My Functions, which is a pretty good read, is that he was not at all suited to the sport and physicality of Gordonstoun. However, he was pretty good at maths, and Kurt Hahn saw to it that he did the necessary papers and sat exams to study mathematics at Cambridge. The outcome is that he became professor of pure mathematics at Imperial College, etc. And for more than 30 years, along with his wife, he ran a famous school in the complex analysis, attracting mathematicians from all over the world. So his daughter is Sheila Heyman, who has been very kind to come up here and assist me with talks about her film to do with Mendelssohn and the Nazis. The Heymans and the Hahns were also related to the Mendelssohns. Right, moving on to slide number 23. 1940. War breaks. We're on the war breaks out And the horrendous thing is for people coming to this country from Germany and Austria, regardless of whether they were Jewish or not, a command was given, collar the lot, because they would be a risk to security. So internment took place. And this affected some of Gordonstoun's staff. Kurt Hahn was exempt this. But Bex Richter, who by this time was helping out with teaching at Gordonstoun, was interned and sent to Canada for a long time. Some of the older boys were to be interned on the Isle of Man. Now the boys, the younger ones, if about when we're talking about sort of 17, 18, they had an option. They could be interned or they can join the Pioneer Corps. The Pioneer Corps was a very interesting corps because during this time, most enemy aliens that joined the Pioneer Corps were watched carefully, and some were selected to be involved in intelligence work. And one of Gordonstoun School's boys at that time was George Salashin, or George Saunders. And he chose to go in the Pioneer Corps and was selected to be a member of the famous secret troop. It's no longer a secret now, but it certainly was at the time. However, we'll come to George in a minute. But here we have a map, and here we are at the top of Scotland in Moray, and we have to get a whole school evacuated because where we were on Morayshire here is that you have bases to do with the Navy, etc., and also vulnerable to invasion. So the school had to evacuate, and Kurt Hahn, with his networking connections, knew Lord Davis, who owned Plastinum down in Wales, which is in Montgomeryshire, or would now possibly be Powys. So they had to evacuate a whole school down to Plastinum. So next slide, please, Veronica. Monica, I do beg your pardon. Monica. I was calling Monica. Veronica. Okay, so here we have the boys preparing to do a run on their bicycles to catch the train at Perth. So Kurt Hahn decided that we may be increasingly a source of suspicion being up here. So on military advice, Hahn decided to move his school to Plastinum in Wales. So in 1940, the boys had cycle parties, and here they are practicing for the evacuation to Plastinum. They cycled to Perth Railway, staying at Wester Elkies Prep School, and Rannoch en route. Rannoch was another, I think, around Square School at some time, I'm not sure. Now here we are. Here's Plastinum in Morayshire. Looks quite nice. However, the boys weren't staying in the house. They had to live in tents for a while until... Could you go to slide 27, please, Veronica? Monica?
Sorry, I don't actually have the numbers, Marjorie, so you're going to have to direct me.
Miss the ship and go to the... That's the one.
Yeah.
So the boys were put to building their own classrooms and huts. Now, this is where the experiential educational system is really valid, isn't it? It's hands-on, helping and doing, and it's absolutely fantastic. I'm sure the boys would not have thought this was fantastic, really, but nevertheless, they did it, and what an achievement at the end of the day, because in the next slide, one of the huts completed by the boys. So it's better, I think, than being in a tent all the time. Now, if during this time at Plastillen, the boys, 29, the next one, the boys also helped on local farms with potato picking, rounding up mountain ponies, building huts, sailing, and doing their lessons. And sometimes there was time for a bit of a party after a school play. So they're still busy. And the next slide, please. During this time, as fire service became a thing for Gordonstoun, and it still is today. It has its own tender, and they really have played a very important role in belonging to the local fire service, both in Wales, but also in the local area here of Morrisshire. If there is a fire, Gordonstoun School would be carried out, called out to them, and we always had a full number of pupils wanting to be trained as a fire person, boys and girls latterly as well. Now, whilst in Wales, Kurt Hahn saw the opportunity with Lawrence Holt, the Sea School over at Abu Dhabi, to start an outward bound movement. Now, this outward bound movement has become something very big indeed in this country and in other countries too. So it is during this time in Wales that seed was sown and has really worked very well indeed. So the boys learning to sail. Now, after all this time, 5 years in Wales, number 31, we're returning back to Morrisshire. Now, what I forgot to say was that the boys took the horses down on the train anyway, but now they have to get them back up to Gordonstoun on the trains. So here they are at the station at Llandinum, ready to go on the train with their horses. I think they led quite an interesting life in Wales, despite the fact they might not have had the creature comforts for home. Number 32, please. In June 1946, the staff and boys sailed the Prince Louis boat from Abu Dhabi back up to Morrisshire. It all looks very fun, but it's hard work. It's very hard work indeed. And it needs a lot of skill to do this sort of thing. And this is where the boys had the opportunity to be amongst very fine people who knew what they were doing in schooling them to do this sort of work. They had very good start indeed. Right, let's go on to the next one, please. And we're back at Gordonstoun. Now, so far, many of you will know a lot more than what I've given you today, but in this short time, I can't give you absolutely every single detail, but that gives you a rough idea of what Gordonstoun is all about. It's a much greater picture than this, believe you me, but that gives you an idea of it. Kurt Hahn was an amazing person, there's no doubt about it. I don't think he did actually teach a great deal, but he did spend a lot of time negotiating and networking with people who would support his school financially, and also to encourage people who had very good experiences themselves to come and share those experiences with the boys at the school, and later, of course, the girls and boys. I cannot sing the praises enough of Anna Essinger and Kurt Hahn with what they managed to achieve with so little in the first place to what they took it to by the time Anna Essinger had finished in 1948, and also Kurt Hahn. Although he retired a long time ago, the school continues to flourish to this day. Now, recently, the Association of Jewish Refugees came up to Gordonstoun and presented the school with a blue plaque. This was a very pleasant service, and I must say that it was a pleasure to take part and to see how the school has progressed even since I left in 1997. It is doing well, and it is doing its best to uphold the Kurt Hahn values. 35. Now we come to the Camphill movement. Karl König was Austrian from Vienna. He trained as a doctor, specializing in pediatrics. He was a prolific writer on anthroposophy and its use in medicine, conventional medicine. He also had to leave Vienna to flee, and he came to this country, and through the contacts of the Houghton family and the Macmillan family in Aberdeen, he was given a house, a pretty big house, to bring his friends, family and friends, and some children that needed his care to go to what became Camphill. Karl König was the son of a shoemaker in Vienna, and unfortunately, every one of the people in this picture perished in concentration camps. We have a picture here, number 37. Next one, please. We have a picture here of Karl König with his professors in Vienna in 1925. Now, if you look to the lady that looks as if she's got some sort of poor doll, baby doll in her hand, and then take your eye to the right, you'll find a little man there leaning on something that looks like a piano, but I don't think it is, and he's got a moustache. That is Karl König. He was quite minute in stature, but a very fine, caring person. Now, in the next... Good. Now, Ita Wegman plays a very important role in the development of König's ideas. She ran a clinic called the Landerziehungsheime Clinic in Switzerland, and I think it still exists to this day. She became very involved in nursing, massage therapy, physiotherapy, and also eventually trained as a doctor of medicine herself. She was quite an amazing intellectual lady, also never stopping to find ways to actually make things work well for her clinic with her ideas. Now, Karl König joined this team in 1927 until 1936. He gained valuable experience here working with children with special needs. Now, Rudolf Steiner plays quite an important part in both of the lives of Ita Wegman and also Karl König. Now, Steiner, although he wasn't Jewish, he became a target of the Nazi Party as they viewed anthropology as a contradiction to the National Socialism. His books were banned from libraries, and in fact, during his lectures, stink bombs were often let off. So, both young people and adults were the closest to their hearts, along with the fringe groups of society who were persecuted or threatened. So in 1933, Ita Wegman saved many lives by helping them to escape from Germany, and it's through her contacts in the UK and her kindness that she advised and helped Karl König to establish the renowned Camphill movement. Now, the Houghtons happened to know Ita Weigman very well, and it is through her connection, along with the Macmillan connection, that he goes to Aberdeen. So he takes with him his family, Tilly, his wife, his children, a group of helpers, also doctors, and they aim to build a community for children and adults with learning difficulties, and to live in a residential setting, to learn and to work with others in a safe and social environment. The essence of their work is admirable, and combination of compassion, encouraging social skills through a group with rhythm, through group rhythm in music and ecological sensitivity to gardening and farming. The emphasis is for these children at Camphill is for doing, and the children are left free of academic learning so that they can focus on practical and social activities. König's vision and ideas were not easily accepted. However, nonetheless, in a short time, he was able to show that no child, young person or adult with an intellectual disability was not able to be educated. He introduced biodynamic farming, commenced along with having some cows and other livestock, chickens, and this gave these young children and adults an opportunity for them to learn through experiential experience as well as curative, all being hands-on. So between the three types of education, they all complement each other in many ways and cross over. You have three different educators here, but the thing that they all have in common is that their ideas are very similar in many ways, but they adapt them to suit the youngsters or adults, young adults they have with them. And I think this is where the three schools have been extremely successful. To this day, Camphill flourishes throughout the world through this initial effort on behalf of Karl König, his wife, and his family and children and staff. Now, they moved to Kirkton House, and again, it's quite big, but it was in heck of a state when they got there. But through kindness of other people and hands-on experience, they managed to get some sort of power into the house, some heating and something to sleep on, etc., and to start working at their vision. And each of these educators did have vision, and the vision came to fruition. So in the next slide, we're nearly to the end of this now. In the next slide, this is the first group of refugee children who arrive at Kirkton House, and they come from the Kindertransport. And these were children that were thought that would require this type of help. One of these children never ever knew there was a Holocaust. All of her family was wiped out during the Holocaust. And the Königs decided never to tell her anything. And she lived until quite late on in life through the Camphill movement, working in the Camphill movement. She did have some brain damage, but she could manage well enough to look after other children and to carry out quite difficult tasks at times in looking after children, but she also went to other places to do with Camphill movement. She died a few years ago, but she knew nothing about what a Holocaust was or who her family was, because her family was the Camphill movement. So next slide, please. Here are more children coming to Camphill. Karl König is very diminutive. He's there in the centre wearing a sort of trilby type hat. I don't think it's a trilby, but it's similar looking. That is he there, and also some of his staff as well. And I have no names for these people, unfortunately, and I haven't had a chance to go across to Camphill to get some more information on that because of other things happening in my life at the moment. Now, our next image are fine examples of really the kindness. It's a lovely photograph, that. And then on to the next one. Here we have a fine example of hands-on working away, learning how to do something that is purposeful, worthwhile, and boosting confidence too, and traditional ploughing of fields as well. It's hard work, but it all is worthwhile. I find these photographs very moving. And 45. I think this is a fine example of Camphill. I have to say, this project has brought more tears to my eyes than anything else I've done. And I didn't think I'd break down today, but I find this whole project very moving. So thank you very much for listening in. And we'll just round off with the next slide. Karl König died in 1966, and this is a photograph of him not long before that with some of his staff. In this country alone, the Camphill movement does its work. And it is extended to other countries too, and more so in Germany as well. So, thank you very much for listening. I'm sorry that I can't give you what colour socks Kurt Hahn wore when he made his escape to Britain. But that gives you a gist of the types of education. If you want to know more about these three people, please have a look at Deborah Cadbury's book about Bunce Court. Mary Barrett has written two very good books indeed, The Pioneers and Pioneering of Gordonstoun, and also The Warriors of Gordonstoun. And you can get those through me. And also Camphill has a very good website, and you can look up all sorts of things there that will give you greater detail than I've been able to give you today. What they're doing today is remarkable. And I've had several friends who've had children who have been residential there, and they've come out to have gained so much from that experience. The same with Gordonstoun pupils. I know many Gordonstoun pupils to this day that I taught, and I think there's one online tonight at least. And I found that they have all turned out to be fantastic people, very good people. And those I've met or had conversations with to do with Bunce Court have also been very grateful for the opportunities that they've been given in this country. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so very much, Marjorie. That was indeed deeply moving and hugely informative as well. I'm aware of time pressing on, but let's give people a chance. I think we must give people a chance to ask questions.
Give them a chance.
Yes, indeed.
Oh, the last slide needs to go up.
Oh, did we? Right.
Last slide.
Did we miss one? Let me go back. Hold on a second. So no, it's okay. There we go, and we have one more. Yeah. Hold on, it keeps jamming. There we go. Back, yes.
And then there's one more.
One more after that?
There we go.
Oh.
So we round off.
We come full circle.
So
yes?
we round off with schools on the move. Things are always moving forward in education, thankfully. But here we have three very important people in the education world, and I think we owe a lot to a lot of refugees that came to this country for science, arts, education. Thank you, and we are so grateful for what we get.
Thank you so much, Marjorie. Right, let's just check the chat. I know there were some questions coming in to do with religion. Let's just have a look.
Yes,
Yes,
I can answer.
hold on a second. Let's have a look. You sort of, yes, you touched on some of these issues, didn't you? I mean,
I
Catherine was
did.
asking, I don't know if you can see the chat, were children at Bunce Court following their Jewish religion and given religious teaching? You mentioned the chapel and the Christian
Yeah.
side, but if
Now,
you were,
Bunce Court, Anna Essinger decided that it seemed best not to have any dominant faith. But the school was not without spiritual meaning. And I think that came through in the way that they handled everyday life. And that they could choose later on what they wanted to do. But because of the fact that they were Jewish, of course, I think that in a way, she herself was a Quaker. She changed from Jewish faith to a Quaker. So I think there was an influence of Quakerism there, but it was never imposed. Religion was never imposed, but there was certainly spiritual content in their lives, but it was more of an unconscious one rather than a conscious one. For Karl König and his family, they were Jewish, but in fact they renounced that and became Christians. And the foundation originally based at Camphill was that of a Christian basis. But of course things change as the world changes, that nowadays there's a greater integration of different nationalities and creeds and what have you. So, you know, you level out the situation. But certainly for Kurt Hahn, the school had a Christian basis, as did the Outward Bound do.
I think one has to sort of also remember that, I'm sure I'm not telling anybody anything new, but that actually the vast majority of the refugees who came to this country, or certainly ended up in schools like these, were not religiously orthodox in a Jewish sense. They were assimilated. They felt probably more German or Austrian than they did Jewish. So I think maybe the move towards Quakerism or indeed other, Christian religion was
Yes,
sort
and
of
I
not
think
that much of a shock, I wonder.
well, I found that not all, but quite a few Jewish people I have met have certainly gravitated towards Quakerism.
It's an interesting subject, that, isn't it? I
Yes.
can't help mentioning, apropos Quakerism, that actually there was a talk not very long ago by by Anita Pellig, who's the daughter of Naomi Blake, a Holocaust survivor sculptor, who did a rather lovely sculpture that's actually in Friend's house. I don't know if you know it, Marjorie, on the landing as you go up the big staircase in Euston Road, dedicated to Bertha Bracey, because, as acknowledgement.
Oh,
Yes.
she was amazing, and also
Absolutely.
all of those that worked with her. The work they did to help in Berlin and Vienna and what have you to get the children out of there was
No
stunning.
question at all. I think they're very much
Stunning.
unsung
Very.
heroes.
There are no heroes or heroines. I really resent those two titles, but there are people who've been very brave and courageous.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. A very mundane but important question from Simon Pickford. How were the schools financed? Were fees paid by absent parents or were there
Well,
benefactors?
the schools were financed. Bunce Court was financed by taking in one or two local children whose parents could afford some fees. Also, they relied heavily on gifts via sponsors, etc. You see, all three of them had pretty good contacts. Kurt Hahn had a very good contact in the Smith Cummings for a start. And also he had contacts in other places. And also if he could encourage the likes of the Winthrop Youngs and the Mark Arnold Forsters, they came from pretty wealthy upper class backgrounds. So, there was something trickling in. But most of the staff, I know this for a fact, that most of the staff in the three schools for many years did not have a salary or a wage. They
True.
had instead board and lodge and the opportunity to survive along with the rest of them. And I think that says a lot about them as people too. And I think it also perhaps most of these children and staff came from pretty affluent homes in Germany and Austria, and the likes. And to come to these places, which were pretty awful, really, compared to what they were used to having at home, let alone not having their parents and family around them. They all managed somehow to work it out together. And also by getting to know the locality. Kurt Hahn was brilliant with the locality here. So he would give a couple of places to the school for local children here. So if you do that, you're going to get something back, aren't you? So I think that's, it's negotiation. Kurt Hahn in particular, I think he had pretty good connections where there was some finance coming in. But that's not to say the school was wealthy, because it's a big place to maintain. People need feeding. There's this thing about Gordonstoun and the cold showers. Well, that may be so, but I mean, I doubt whether it was hot water anyway, because they couldn't afford the heating to heat the water. You didn't have central heating like you do today. So there are all these sort of things that are taken into consideration. The thing is that I found really quite interesting is how busy all of these children would be, which I think was possibly an advantage to helping them to not spend too much time thinking about themselves. I think it's later in life that when they have time to reflect back, that they realize that, that there is possibly deep-seated trauma that needs to come through. And that's a different aspect of the whole thing as well, is the trauma involved through leaving your homeland and coming to a foreign place and to fit in, etc.
Sorry to interrupt, Catherine, because I'm sorry, Marjorie, I'm looking at a question from Catherine, a very specific one, but again, an indication that this is perhaps they're the better known parts of a bigger story. She's asking, Will, whether you've come across a school called Beltane in Wimbledon, founded in 1934 with teachers and pupils from a Montessori school in Berlin. That sounds interesting.
Oh, how do you spell that?
Beltane, Beltane. I can put you in touch with Catherine if Catherine would like.
I'd very much like to
Yes,
know.
sure, with pleasure. And lots of appreciative words coming. Yes,
there were roughly at least 50 places in this country that were set up to accommodate and educate children from the Kindertransport. And
extraordinary number, isn't it? It really is.
Extraordinary.
Yeah.
I have the maps. I must get hold of the map and put this on the PowerPoint, because it is extraordinary. And also, of course, there was a farming, I can't remember the name of it. No, Mary Byett might know. Is she here? Yes. Mary, what was the name of the farming thing that Leo Richter was part of, where they would train these young Jewish people in farming, and then they would, with the possibility of going out to Israel later?
It was, I can't remember, I'm afraid, but he ran a place at Benson.
At Benson in Oxford, yeah. And there was that sort of program as well that was running for the older boys and girls. To get into that, all sorts of things. Every time I go to do more research, I find a new thread. Out of that new thread, I find even more threads. So I have the biggest cobweb building around me of all sorts of interesting things that I can sit and read the detail, but actually to try and précis a lot of this and to put it into this sort of presentation is actually quite tricky. I will admit that. And also deciding what you really want to take out of research and present. It's very difficult, because every aspect of what has happened is relevant to the end product.
Can I think we must draw, sadly, to an end fairly soon, but there's an interesting comment from the same Catherine, who obviously knows about all this. She actually makes an important point that you may or may not be aware of, Marjorie. She says, at first, refugee teachers were not allowed to work for a salary because the British government stipulated this due to the economic depression in the 1930s. They were concerned they take the jobs.
Right.
Yeah?
That's absolutely right. And thank you for bringing that up, because many people who came across, adults who came across, were professional people. Susie Lachmann, for instance, was one of the finest female violinists in Germany. And she applied to, she had a sponsor in London. She came to London thinking she was going to get a job as a professional violinist. She wasn't going to get a job. She was offered a job as a domestic servant, which was usually given to women to take on. And she had a young daughter too, Ruth. And luckily, someone happened to mention to Kurt Hahn, I've got a brilliant violinist here. So he takes her on. So she comes up to Scotland, and she started the music off very seriously at Gordonstoun and stayed throughout her time up here until she died. She's buried actually up at the Michael Kirk at Gordonstoun. She never went back to performing. She was dedicated, from what I can gather, to her teaching of the youngsters at Gordonstoun. She left an amazing legacy of classical music.
We'll have to invite you back, Marjorie, when you're ready for sort of a talk about your latest researches. Perhaps we should end on a very touching note from somebody called Claire, saying, thank you so much. I'm a Quaker and I've also worked in Steiner schools. I'm grateful for the warmth and appreciation you showed in your talk. I mean, that was absolutely palpable. And I'm just looking, there's one last message that's come. Oh, hold on. Right, okay, Robert Drake, let me just read this out. A number of pupils at Bunce Court was sponsored by the Quakers. My husband Mark Aldbrook's father, Alex Urbach, was sponsored by a Quaker lady at Bunce Court who sadly died in 1940, so he had to leave. Ava Mill, who became Alex's wife, and her sister Miriam had their fees paid by their father for 2 years, but left when that ran out. Miriam went to Ryman's art school. It's another interesting subject. Ava joined the Anglo-Polish Ballet. How interesting. Joseph and his wife Friedel were subject to the Polen Aktion, deported from Hamburg to Poland in October 38. Ava vividly remembers being summoned to Anna Essinger office to hear this news. They both managed to get here before the war broke out. Yeah. Again, I can put you in touch with Robert.
I'd love that. Thank you very much.
Yes. Okay. Well, I think
more threads.
More threads. It's endlessly fascinating. Thank you so much, Marjorie. And thank everybody.
You all very much for joining in. And it's a pleasure to share my findings. There is more, but I'm afraid we can't get it all into.
Well, it's whetting people's appetite to find out more, which is always a good
thing. Thank you very much indeed for joining in tonight.
So, just in conclusion, as I mentioned before, the talk has been recorded and we'll be uploading the recording onto our YouTube channel. Take a look. I'm actually remembering there was a talk specifically on the Quakers by someone called David Dawson, a practicing Quaker who spoke very eloquently some while ago. There are talks on internment. There's actually a whole section on creativity in the British internment camps. And on it goes. Edith Tudor Hart did some wonderful photographs at Camphill. I'm curious to know more about that. But
she did. Yes, yes, indeed.
Enough for one day. But yes, many leads to follow, many threads to be woven together. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much. Good night, everyone. Keep well.
I'll just finally say that there's going to be a bit of a lull, partly because I'm very busy with other things, but there is a talk coming up on the 27th of May on a very different subject called Rogues and Scholars, about the British art world from 1945 to 2000, based on a new book by James Stoughton, which has a strong emphasis on the so-called brilliant emigres that acted that moved in those spheres. And then we'll be doing a whole cluster of talks on a range of different topics to coincide with UK Refugee Week in mid-June. So look out for those. If you haven't signed up to the newsletter, you might like to do so by going to the insidersoutsiders.festival.org website, scroll right down to the bottom of the home page, and you can sign up for the newsletter very, very easily. Good. Marjorie, thank you ever so much.
Well, thank you.
And goodbye, everyone. Be well.
Bye.
Thank you, Marjorie.
My pleasure.
Marge.
Bye. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.